Hello, I'm Marcia KAVANAUGH. Thanks so much for joining us. In a week already made tense by the ongoing coronavirus crisis and a tropical storm in the Gulf, demonstrations across the country raised social issues and tested the mettle of local law enforcement. We'll be looking at these stories as well as New Orleans possibly joining the rest of the state in Phase 2. Political maneuvers at the legislature, and the Pelicans returning to the court. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources, Jessica Williams, reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate, Mike PERLSTEIN, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4, and Tyler Bridges, reporter, The Times-Picayune, The New Orleans Advocate. Go over to Jessica first. Phase 2. And this is the day of Phase 2 statewide, correct?
This is, and we're seeing loosened restrictions everywhere in Louisiana pretty much, except for New Orleans. We're staying put, we're staying in Phase 1, but what we have learned is that by as early as next week, barring that we're not all underwater, hopefully crossing our fingers not with this tropical storm, we could see something loosen. And so New Orleans has said that it will call its next progression Phase 2. And that's even if we don't adopt everything that the state does elsewhere in other parishes. We may adopt some, is what I'm hearing.
So give us an idea of Phase 2, at least statewide, if not in Orleans Parish right now. What will we be able to experience now?
So I was actually just out earlier today talking with business owners in Jefferson Parish who have been unable to open since mid-March. I spent some time at a tattoo shop earlier today that was just swamped. People were trying to get pieces that they'd started finished back before the pandemic really took hold in the state. They were getting calls. People were coming in saying, when can I be seen? I've been tired of waiting. I also spent some time at a bowling alley where they were just swamped with people who had been waiting to get their leagues back together. So bowling alleys are allowed to reopen today at 50% capacity. Tattoo shops are allowed to reopen today, inviting back some of their customers. And we're seeing restaurants come back, being able to boost their initial capacity, which was 25%, up to 50%. And we're seeing more and more people waiting in line. As I was driving down Veterans today, I saw plenty of people standing outside waiting to be seated at several different restaurants. But in New Orleans, at least for today, it's still the status quo.
But Jessica, what can we expect for New Orleans next week?
So one of the things that Chief Health Department Director Jennifer Avegno said, and she didn't quite go into detail on which specific rules she was eyeing, but she did say that the restaurant rule seemed reasonable for New Orleans. She said that based on what we've seen, the rule that around the rest of the state that restaurants increase their capacity by 50% could be something that the city is looking at. It is also a possibility that the city would take on some of the things that it didn't adopt in Phase 1, whereas the rest of the state, for example, saw its casinos open up. New Orleans kept casinos closed. And so we may, in fact, see Harrah's reopening in some capacity. The mayor said that she's been in talks with Harrah's about their reopening plan. And their parent company has begun to reopen casinos around the country with social distancing, with some of the high-touch games not being brought back. With masks and with other precautions that they've taken to ensure the safety of their customers. And so we may see that in New Orleans as well. We're told that more information about that will come once the city gets out of the threat of Tropical Storm Cristobal.
Right. They finally get a chance to open up a little bit more, and we have a tropical storm bearing down on us. In terms of restaurants, for the 50% capacity, that applies just to inside seating, is that correct?
It applies to inside seating because if you remember before, there was no real limit as long as you were socially distant on how many tables you could set up outside. And in a lot of cases, the mayor actually made it possible for restaurants to use their outside parking lots as additional seating for customers, but they weren't allowed to have any more than 25% capacity on the inside. Around the rest of the state, what Phase 2 does is boost that up to about half of the capacity, still with social distancing, still with other measures such as masks. Some places are doing temperature checks. And so we're hearing that the city is looking at that for its own Phase 2. But again, they haven't released any firm details. They actually said they were waiting until today when the state's restrictions went into effect and it could see everything in writing to determine just what it would pull from the state's Phase 2 what it would readopt from phase one and where it would go forward.
So for retail, or is all retail able to open up now, maybe with a limited capacity in terms of who can come into the store, like boutiques and
So
bigger
that was
stores?
right. So that was the case in around the rest of the state before. It was 25% capacity. Malls, the outdoor exterior, if you had an exterior entrance, you were allowed to welcome back some of your customers. But the big sort of takeaway from phase two around the state is bars. Bars are actually allowed to open up, even if they don't have food permits, at 25% capacity. And so that has opened up some of the bars that had been closed since mid-March around the rest of the state. In New Orleans, they've been closed. Still, the mayor has not said whether or not she would go ahead and embrace that move from phase two. But we're looking to next week to see whether or not we would see more activity in the French Quarter with some of the bars.
Right.
Because one of the restaurant owners that I spoke with said, Ralph Brennan mentioned, I've got, Ralph's on the Park in Mid-City, which is a neighborhood place, and that's doing great. Even when we go into phase two, they'll continue to do great. But in order to really bring some activity in the French Quarter, we've got to have some of our bars be allowed to open, even if they don't have food permits.
All righty, Jessica, thanks a lot for that update. Thanks, we appreciate it. Mike, over to
Thank
you.
you.
Something else that certainly has been going on here and around the country are protests. And we've seen them happen in the city, peaceful for the most part. The other night, a little bit of an incident there. So, NOPD is used to handling crowds. Is this helping in dealing with these protests?
Oh, no doubt. It's a huge help. The NOPD is not overmatched by large crowds, and we're seeing that with nightly protests. They usually have been beginning around 6 o'clock in Duncan Plaza across from City Hall. With nightfall, that group, which numbers in the thousands, by the way, is marching. The first march, the group went to the top of I-10. The police actually went with them. It blocked traffic. However, the police, and it was very interesting, that could have gone any number of different ways, but in that case, the police actually helped escort the people up the on-ramp and knelt with them on the I-10. Pretty remarkable. And it very much looked like New Orleans was really getting something right compared to some of the violent clashes in other cities with protests that turned violent and in some cases even into looting. The following night, the group started once again at Duncan Plaza, numbering in the thousands, and this time marched on the Crescent City Connection Bridge. That's where the NOPD really drew the line. About halfway up the bridge, I don't know what the determining factor was on halting that march about halfway across the bridge, perhaps because it was going to be out of their jurisdiction on the Jefferson Parish side. But the NOPD basically decided, we're not going to let you go any further. We're here to, escort you peacefully. But, police in riot gear did, form a barricade. And that's where things got a little murky as to when things kind of reached a tipping point that led to the use of tear gas on what had been a peaceful protest. The group, in the front were able to interact with the police. But again, this is a group numbering in the thousands. So, 4, 5, 10, and even 20 rows back, you certainly had protesters who didn't really see what the confrontation was with the police as far as not letting the protesters go beyond that point into Jefferson Parish. Tear gas canisters were thrown into the crowd. That led to, kind of a chaotic scene. And the one thing we've seen throughout all of these protests across the country is they are the most videotaped and well documented of any protests maybe ever in the history of the country, because everybody has a cell phone. Everyone is aware of the historic moment. I do think that, considering that we're in day 11 of these daily and nightly protests, in cities, remember it started in Minneapolis, obviously, with what is now being determined as a murder of George Floyd. It's gone from San Diego to Buffalo and then here in New Orleans, where very commendable that our protests have been peaceful, and even with the cooperation of police. Now, mind you, this is in a city that has a long history of police misconduct, of violence and brutality. That's why the NOPD partially is under a consent decree to improve those, shortcomings from years past. And we're a little ahead of the curve of many of the things that are in discussion that police departments should be doing. Wearing body cameras, independent police monitors, de-escalation, the kind of, what you saw with George Floyd, which was a knee on the neck, is not allowed in NOPD, nor is a chokehold or many of the other tactics that are still allowable in other police departments. Look for those to be revisited and I'm sure prohibited as a result of these protests. Very interesting that this one incident was a catalyst for something that myself as a criminal justice reporter, we've seen these cases. Let's look at what happened on the Danziger Bridge after Hurricane Katrina, lawsuits as well as criminal prosecutions. But this one has inflamed the nation. And New Orleans has passed many, many tests as far as how we're handling this.
Let me get you to touch on quickly, if you could. The chief had warned about outside agitators. Are we seeing that?
And obviously we're getting help from, federal authorities, listening to intelligence as to whether there were people on the outside maybe coming in to turn peaceful protests into, something a little more violent. I think they have a pretty good handle on that. Now, one thing that is certainly true, when you have a crowd of thousands, and especially with nightfall, these are unpredictable situations, very volatile. Things can turn on a dime with a few bad actors. You start, as we've seen in some cities, start breaking storefront windows, and it becomes a free-for-all. People will do something in group settings that they would never do as individuals, especially with heavy police presence. So the NOPD is very watchful for any outside agitators, even scanning the crowd, using intelligence ahead of time from federal authorities. And I know going into the weekend, that is top of mind with the NOPD.
Right. All right, Mike, thanks a lot. We hope that it all remains peaceful. Tyler, over to you, over in Baton Rouge. The Louisiana special session the regular session came to a close, but immediately went into special. So what are they doing up there?
Yeah, so the regular session ended Monday night at 6 p.m. and the special session began 60 seconds later. And one of the key developments during the regular session was that it seemed for a time that the oil industry was going to have some very big victories. Republicans, as you know, now have control of the legislature, and the House Speaker is working together with the Senate President in ways that we haven't seen before. And Republican lawmakers are moving forward with efforts to cut oil and gas taxes, but that effort ended up dying, and so did an effort to kill the lawsuits that parish governments, 7 parish governments have filed lawsuits against oil and gas companies, accusing them of helping destroy wetland marshes, coastal marshes and wetlands. And that effort died right near the end of the session. So that is all ended for now. And as you mentioned, Marcia, the legislature now has begun the special session. Now, one issue that is carrying over is what the supporters of it call the tort reform. This is the effort by the business community to make it harder for people to sue who've been in car accidents. And if they do win a judgment, that they would receive less money. This is aimed at particularly the trial lawyers, making sure that they earn less money and have fewer opportunities to sue. The supporters of this legislation say that the trial lawyers have made sure that Louisiana is a terrible place for people to do business. So that effort passed the legislature on the final day of the legislative session. In the House, we know that the governor has spoken against this legislation, and so if the governor were to veto it, he's got to make a decision in the coming days. The question is then with the legislature in the special session whether they can override that vote. They need a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate, and when the tort reform issue passed the House, it had 66 and not the 70 votes needed to get that 2/3 vote. But so even if they fail in that effort and there was criticism of the final version of the bill, even from the supporters of this legislation. The Republican leadership could try to move another bill during the special session because they have until June 30th.
Because supporters say that this will lower our auto insurance rates. Will it?
Yeah, and they're certainly their highest. They're the second highest in the country. And they point to legislation in the bill that says that the insurance companies shall reduce the rates. But the critics of this legislation say there's all sorts of exceptions and loopholes that it won't actually reduce rates.
Okay, so there's possibly more action on this legislation or similar legislation during the special session then. That issue's not gone away.
Yeah, and we're seeing the governor, who generally got his way, at least ultimately he did in the first 4 years as governor. He's really playing defense. There's no bills that he tried to really get through in the regular session. He shelved his legislation to focus on the coronavirus pandemic. So he's really playing defense against these efforts that the Republicans are pushing to make it harder for trial lawyers to sue, and also the various measures that would cut taxes on business.
Okay.
And so here in the first week of the special session, really not much has happened. The House Appropriations Committee did pass the budget, which was the one thing the legislature had to do during the regular session and didn't do. So the Appropriations Committee passed that on Friday, and the full House will take that up on Tuesday.
Real quick, special session ends when?
June 30th, and it costs $50,000 to $60,000 a day while legislators are having this overtime session.
Okay.
Is there a possibility for a second special session?
Say that again?
Second
Is there a
special-
possibility for a second special session?
I would think that the legislature will get everything done by June 30th, and perhaps even earlier, but there is a great likelihood that later in the year, maybe Congress will pass legislation sending more money to states, or the states' budget problems will get worse, that the legislature will have to come back here to Baton Rouge.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Tyler. We're going to move on over back to Jessica right now. And movie productions, are they starting to come back? And where do the blue bikes go?
Yeah, so the mayor actually announced, I want to say this was a few weeks ago now, that the film industry was gearing up to return to New Orleans in July. And the one thing that we have learned is a lot of those films that are coming back, it's going to depend on whether the studios and the unions that represent the actors, directors, and crew members can agree on overall standards for their industry for limiting the spread of the coronavirus. And, you know, when you think about a movie set, it's a lot of people, it's hair and makeup, you know, folks that have to touch each other, folks that have to be around each other. You know, how does that work? Do we have face masks on? Do we have temperature checks? They're really trying to figure that out all around the country. And so in New Orleans, we're really waiting for those broader protocols to be worked out. But we do have some local crews who are preparing, you know, who are in communication with folks, films, productions that had been scheduled to film in the city and are just saying, hey, you know, we're ready for you. We've been sanitizing our area and we've created our own sort of protocols. When we spoke to the city's director of the film office, Carol Borton, she mentioned that, you know, it may be a situation where productions may have to be smaller. We may have to see more closed sound stages where things are shot instead of shooting on location, at least in the short term. And at the meanwhile, you've got the popular public bike share system, which had been in effect for about 2 years, had recently gone electric from the pedal bikes that were in place, that is now on indefinite hold. And we don't know when that's coming back. The parent company of the Blue Bike system in the city was bought by another company, Lime. And then shortly after, Lime said, we're putting everything on pause in New Orleans and we'll let you know where we go from here. And the city's kind of been keeping mum about this. They've said, you know, we're hopeful that it'll come back, but we don't quite know. And we're really just in a waiting game and a holding pattern at this point on Blue Bikes.
Because that really had been a popular program that was just getting used
Oh,
more
it was
and more.
incredibly popular. It was incredibly popular. And the city actually made money off of it as well. I believe it was something like 2% of every time someone rode a bike, the city was able to reap some benefits from that, some profit from it. And people really sort of began to herald that system as a way to encourage more general bike riding around New Orleans,
Right.
to encourage less use of cars, and even as a sort of stopgap, a final mile once you get on public transportation or get off of public transportation, get on a bike to make it to your next destination. It was really the impetus for adding more lanes, more infrastructure all around the city.
Okay, all right. We'll see if those come back. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Tyler, back over to you. Some appointments were just sort of taken off the books, as it were, to everybody's surprise. That happened this week. Statewide appointments.
The Senate meets every year in what's called an executive session, and they kick out the reporters, they kick out most of the staff, the public, the TV cameras are turned off. They meet for maybe 30, 45 minutes to confirm dozens and dozens of appointments to boards and commissions, also the governor's cabinet. And it happens, and afterwards, nobody really pays it too much attention. There's really no controversy. But this year, during the session on Monday, I got a call Tuesday morning and learned that the rather dramatic thing had happened, that a state senator from New Orleans named Karen Carter Peterson, who also chairs the state Democratic Party, that she had put a hold on two of the governor's key appointments. One is Ronnie Jones, who is the longtime, very well-respected chairman of the Louisiana Gaming Control Board, and the other was Walt Leger, a very well-respected state legislator, sidelined by term limits, who had now been named by the governor to chair the Ernest N. Memorial Convention Center Board. Well, Karen Carter Peterson, during the secret session, put a hold on those confirmations, which caused them to lose their jobs. So Monday was the last day for Ronnie Jones with the Gambling Board and Walt Leger as the Convention Center Board chairman. And then the governor has to make new appointments. He's already filled the position on the Gambling Board, but it really shined a lot what Karen Carter Peterson did. She blackballed 6 members of the appointments. 5 others people also did not get confirmed, and the shine a light on this little known practice where a single legislator, if one of the appointees lives in that senator's district, the
And
senator
it's registered
can put a hold
voter.
and block
Yeah.
that, and put a block on that confirmation. So Karen Carter Peterson has not returned my calls to explain why she has done this in secret.
Has she made any
there's great
statement?
speculation, but
Has she made any statement to anybody as to why she did it, other than, she could,
I think she told a colleague of mine that it happened at a confidential session. I pointed out in a story of mine that a year ago she had to acknowledge, because of a report on Mike's station, that she had been caught gambling and entering a LaBerge casino in Baton Rouge, and that she had put herself on a list of casinos held by the state gambling board, that she could not enter any casino because she has a gambling problem. So she put herself on that list and then violated it, and WWL found out and reported that news. It was very embarrassing to her. So the rampant speculation is that she went after Ronnie Jones because of that, even though he says he had nothing to do with that information becoming public.
And these folks were just blindsided by it. They didn't know that this was going to become
Absolutely blindsided. Yeah, all of the 6 people that she removed by putting on holds on their confirmation, none of them had any idea, and nor did the governor. And he's not happy about it.
And as you pointed out, Walter Leger is very much respected in chairing that convention center, which has all kind of major issues that it's dealing with.
Yeah, and the casino industry is reopening, and Roddy Jones is a role in opening all that up. And also, as you mentioned, Leger, very well-respected member, been a speaker pro tem. The governor tried to make him be speaker, and the convention center is dealing with all sorts of huge spending issues, and now they need a new leader.
Well, maybe we'll find out a reason why this happened. But for now, it happened. Errol, we need to go over to you now in this final segment about the Pelicans. Return.
Yeah, it would be easier to explain the theory of relativity than the NBA playoff that's going to evolve. But what they're going to do is they're going to get 22 teams out of the NBA. Now, always in the playoffs, you got 2 divisions. And the way it ends, the top 8 teams in each division gets in the playoffs. So that gives you 16. And so that was easy to decide. But then there were some teams, like the Pelicans, who were near that 8th position and not quite there. And they could also, put money into the pot in terms of helping raise TV revenue. So they added the 16 teams plus 6 more who are the next ones. So they're going to have like a playoff among themselves to get into the final playoffs. And so it's like a two-tiered sort of playoff system. The good thing is that it does get the Pelicans into the playoffs. When the season ended, they were in 10th place, looking for that 8th place. They had a horrible start to their season, but they were playing well toward the end. Zion Williamson had been hurt. Now he was back in the game, and they thought they had a good chance of getting that seed. But there was a possibility it could have ended with them losing that chance, but at least they'll be in there. The whole thing is going to be played in Orlando. Orlando has a big complex run by ESPN, by Disney World, and so it's going to be a TV event. But the NBA, of course, has taken a huge beating with all this, without having games, without having an audience, without having fans. And so the biggest thing they can hope for is TV revenue. And so working with TV, they're going to try to revive something. So it's really like a massive two-tiered tournament that starts at the end of July, and it should end sometime in October. Now, usually the NBA season starts in October, the next season, or at least in early November. So probably what's going to happen is that this is going to go until October, and then the next NBA season will start in December, and then here we go again.
All right, but the Pelicans are in it, so that's
If I
good.
can point out real quick, our own Zion Williamson was a factor in those discussions on how to play out the season. Since he's such a huge TV draw, they did not even want to do the play-in game where Zion would only be seen once. They're going to play 8 regular season games, and some kind of playoff format, just to make sure that Zion Williamson, one of the hot names in the NBA, is seen on TV.
All right, then we'll be watching him. And now we're going to circle around with you guys about the other stories that are happening. Start with you.
Okay, well, economics people have been looking toward today for some kind of indication on how the corona economy is going to be. And as you know, most predictions have been gloomy. But they said, look for 2 things today. What happens with unemployment? New figures came out today, and how the stock market reacts. To everybody's surprise, unemployment was greater than people expected. I mean, more people were off the unemployment rolls, and so that was encouraging. And the stock market reacted better than people thought. And so a lot of economics people are seeing some resiliency in the economy that they didn't think was there. And so a little bit of good news today.
That is good news. And you guys have just a little bit of time. Jessica, you. Real quick.
City Councilman Jason Williams is under investigation by the federal IRS, FBI for potentially tax evasion. Potentially, he's saying that it's his accountant's fault, but we'll see how that affects the upcoming district attorney's race,
Right.
Which he's already sort of denounced this as being something that's coming from his opponent.
Mike, quick.
And the election is November 3rd.
All right, Michael, quick.
Indictments into staged accidents. We had 5 guilty pleas already of passengers and drivers. Now we have a guilty plea of an organizer, a professional accident stager, who could lead to an inquiry into attorneys. So that thing is heating up in federal court.
And we will be watching for that. Tyler, 10 seconds.
Yeah, a very slow start here in Baton Rouge the first week of the special session. Things will pick up next week.
Okie dokie. We'll be looking forward. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Thanks to the rest of you guys, and thank you all for watching. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources.